I am Paullina Simons, and this is the story behind my stories.
You're listening to the Author Stories Podcast, bringing you the story behind the stories and the storytellers.
Margaret White,
Terry Brooks,
Sheena Kamal,
Matthew Quick,
JT Ellison,
Walt D. Williams,
Brad Ford,
Corey, Dr. O,
Brandon Sanderson,
Robin Mott,
Ernest Klein, Jim Butcher,
Charlene Harris.
Visit hankgarner.com for archives of all the shows. Today's guest is
Paullina Simons.
It's episode 232 of the Author Stories Podcast. I've got some great sponsors to tell you about today, and if you would like to sponsor the podcast, go to hankgarner.com, and there's a link in the top menu where you can click and send us an email, and we'll be happy to talk to you about it. Also, subscribe to the show. There are links in the right-hand sidebar there at hankgarner.com. Today's sponsors: Peter Codron and his book Retrograde. The international team at the Mars Endeavour colony is prepared for every eventuality except one. What happens when disaster strikes Earth? This book is fantastic. If you are a fan of The Martian, this has kind of that sort of feel to it. I love this book. I love when I got to talk with Peter on the show a couple of weeks ago. Go pick up the book Retrograde. You're going to absolutely love it. The Paragons trilogy by C. Stephen Manley. When dark portals open, heroes will awaken. This is so much fun. Part science fiction horror thriller, part superhero novel. Awakened. Paragon's Book 1 is the first novel in a trilogy series. It provides a gripping origin story filled with mystery, fast-paced action, horrific monsters, and fringe science. If you enjoy a thriller novel with a heavy dose of the fantastic, you'll love Awakened. The entire trilogy is available now. Go pick it up from C. Stephen Manley. Also, thanks to Richard Fox, winner of the 2017 Dragon Award. His 9-book series, The Ember War Saga, is available now. All 9 books. If you're like me, you don't want to jump into a series until, there's a little bit to it, because nothing is worse than getting involved in something and then waiting for them to come out. Go pick up The Ember War Saga. You're going to love it. Military sci-fi at its very best. Also, thanks to Daniel Arthur Smith for sponsoring with Tales from the Canyons of the Damned. The brand new Halloween episode is out, and you're going to love the cover. I'll just tell you this. Good grief, it's Halloween. Go check out that cover. Tales from the Canyons of the Damned, my absolute favorite monthly publication. Go pick it up. Also, thanks to Bob Williams and his newly re-released Music City Macabre and Arch City Apocalypse. Go pick up these 2 books. He also bundled them together as one volume if you'd like to get it that way. There's a link to it in the show notes. I'd also like to thank Samuel Peralta and the Future Chronicles for sponsoring the show. We're going to be talking a lot about them in the coming weeks, so stay tuned. Thank you to Samuel Peralta and the Future Chronicles. Also, my good friends at Keystroke Medium, one of the very best YouTube podcast video shows about writing and the craft. I love these guys. I love their show. I've been on it before. And we're going to be doing something pretty cool, a little joint thing between Author Stories and Keystroke Medium coming soon. So stay tuned for that. Thank you guys for sponsoring the show. ThirdScribe.com is there to connect readers and writers. If you are a writer, you need to have a web presence, and ThirdScribe is one of the best ways to host your work and your products, and also help you connect with readers. Readers, if you want to meet some of your favorite writers, ThirdScribe.com is the place to do it. Go give Rob and the guys a look and join up. ThirdScribe.com. Thanks to all our sponsors for sponsoring this week. And as always, at the end of the show, there's an audio clip from Richard Gleaves, the Jason Crane series. Thank you for listening. Well, thanks for joining me again for the Author Stories Podcast, where I bring you the story behind the stories and the storytellers. Today, I'm really excited to bring you a fantastic interview with Paullina Simons. Paullina not only writes amazing books, but she has a very intriguing personal story as well. And that's what we like to do here, is pull back the covers and show you the story behind the stories and the storytellers. Welcome to the show, Paullina.
Thanks so much, Hank. I'm glad to be here.
Paullina, I begin each show with the same question, and that question is, what is your first memory of wanting to be a writer or a storyteller?
I like being stumped on my first question. My first memory, I would have to say I was 7 years old, and I must have been reading The Three Musketeers in Russia. And that was the first time that I remember thinking, wow, I wish I could write stories of adventure and love and intrigue like Alexander Dumas, because I was just completely besotted with those books.
Now, you mentioned that you read them in Russian. This is a really cool part of your story. You are not originally from the United States in this wonderful American accent that you have.
Yeah, I'm not originally from the United States. I'm originally from Leningrad in the Soviet Union, and I came here when I was 10.
Well, first off, the Leningrad of the Soviet Union, what's not even called Leningrad anymore, is it?
It's called St. Petersburg, right? Yeah, after the fall of communism, they changed it.
Right. I think a lot of folks would really love to know from the perspective of someone who lived there, what was it like then, and how is it different today from your childhood memories?
Well, so I have not since we left Russia, I have not been back except for once in 1998. And when I went back in 1998, things were very much the same as they were when I had left. The only difference being that there were probably more signs, more sort of billboards in English. Proclaiming something about Nokia phones, which is something clearly we did not have in 1973 when I was there. Now, Nokia cell phones, but everything else, the trams, the emptiness of the shelves, our old apartment, the way our friends lived, their lack of bare essentials, including being paid on time by the companies that they worked for. All of that was pretty much still the same as it was when you left.
So when you visited, it was just not quite a decade since the fall of the Soviet Union, I guess?
Yeah, so it fell back at the end of 1991, and this is now mid of 98. So, 7 years. And I want to say that probably in the last 20 years, 19 years, I think things might have changed a little tiny bit, for the better. They got renovated, their buildings got renovated, their infrastructure was rebuilt. So I think that probably there have been some changes for the better.
So you were 10 years old or so when you guys immigrated to the U.S. What brought you here?
Well, so it was my dad. My dad wanted a better life for his family. He really thought that we were living in a dead end, and he really, after 1968, after the invasion of Czechoslovakia, he was arrested and he spent like 3 years in prison. And after that, he was like, I'm ready to leave. And so he, worked for 2 years. He was in exile for 2 years after that, but then he started working on trying to get out in 1971, and then by 73. He was able to get us out.
What was the process like to leave? Because when you think of Soviet bloc Russia, that's not. You just don't decide to leave and you just pack your family up and leave.
It's not like you're just going to be able to pack up your boxes. All right, guys, let's get the truck over. We're moving to Texas. Yeah, it was not quite like that. So the first thing that we had to do is we had to renounce our Soviet citizenship, because the only way at that time anyway to leave Russia was on an Israeli visa. So we basically asked for permission to leave, to go to Israel, because that was the only immigration that they allowed. So we had to renounce our Soviet citizenship, and we got an Israeli visa, and we left as future citizens of Israel. That was sort of the procedure. And then by the time we got to Vienna, as long as we were out of the Eastern Bloc. So when we went to Vienna, which was an Austrian outside of the sort of the Soviet sphere of influence. They didn't care where you went after that. So a lot of people who left Russia this way, some of them, of course, went to Israel, but some of them, went to America and to England and to Germany and to other places.
So like Billy Joel said, Vienna literally waited for
Yes. Vienna literally waited for me. Yeah.
Oh, that's fantastic. So you guys eventually landed in New York, is that right?
We eventually landed in New York. Now, just to clarify, we were not Jewish, but the only way to leave Russia was to say that you were Jewish. They didn't allow Russian nationals to leave the Soviet Union. So that was not something that you could do. You could do what our friend did, which is he ran. He literally left his wife and his pregnant wife and escaped on a train through Finland. So you could do it like that. But if you we tried, because my father had a small child, me and my mom. He really didn't want to be doing that, and so they tried this way, which is to renounce your citizenship, renounce your nationality, and say that you were going to Israel. And that's
wow. And thank God for Israel accepting immigrants. Like that's an amazing part of the story. So you guys never made it to Israel?
Well, no, that was never our plan. The plan was never
right.
The plan was never to go to Israel. The plan was so in Vienna. Vienna was like it was like a central house and then you have spokes in the wheel, and they go everywhere else in the world. So some Russian immigrants absolutely went to Israel. Some went to England. Some went to Germany. And we, of course, applied to come to the United States because that was my father's, dream. That's what he wanted to do. After that, we had to go to Rome. We had to live in Italy. That was terrible, right? We had to live in Italy for months, waiting for permission to enter the United States. But then finally, we got that and received that and came here right around Thanksgiving.
What sort of well, I can't even. That was. I'm trying to form a question in my mind because all this is just swirling around. As a 10-year-old child, leaving the only home that you had known, the only country that you had known, landing in Vienna, then Rome, and then eventually the U.S., where you are meeting people from all different cultures, different languages, and you're just kind of thrust into this situation. What was going through your mind during this time, and what sorts of imaginations did you have of the future home that you would eventually land in?
Well, so here's the thing. So in Russian schools, we heard a lot of bad things about America. You'd be surprised to hear that, but there was a lot of bad stuff that was said about America. So you sort of, as a 10-year-old child, when your dad says that we're going to to America, you're thrilled but a little bit petrified also. So I guess I was very much excited, but at the same time I knew that I was hearing a lot of propaganda, and I very much wanted to sort of to go in and see whether any of it was true. You sort of heard stories that the sharks eat all the people who are on the beaches, and the government does nothing about that, and and kind of stuff like that. For the 10-year-old mind, that was quite terrifying. So I think that was my first question to my dad when he said to me that we're going to be leaving the Soviet Union and going to America is, are the sharks going to eat us? He was like, no, the sharks are not going to eat us. And so my whole thing was, I was okay, so just imagine this. I was incredibly excited because I was the only one of all my friends who was going to have this experience. And I couldn't tell any of them too. So it was painful for me because all I wanted to do was tell them I'm going to America. And there was no way that I was allowed to, to say anything. And so when we left, and then when we came here, it was it was certainly a completely different environment for me.
I can only imagine that in your young mind, it probably seemed like a Dumas swashbuckling adventure. You're traveling across the world to new lands and.
Yeah, completely. It completely was, and I was filled with hope because my father was filled with hope, and I couldn't, I was myself not a pessimistic child, and as a child, generally, you're always looking forward to things. And this isn't just like a little move. It's not like, we're relocating from one state to another. This was leaving behind everything. But there was also something so just incredibly exciting about it.
Yeah. And hope is infectious. When someone around you is full of hope, it really bleeds over into others. Completely,
Hank. And especially when it's your dad, because you love and respect your dad, and your dad says something, you believe it. It took me probably until I was about in my 30s or 40s to ever disagree with him about anything. Basically, my father said it was like gospel. Oh, my dad said it. It can only be that way. So as a young child, I was very, very much sort of swayed by him and his enthusiasm.
Yeah, I can imagine. So we could talk about this all day, but so you land in the U.S. Before, when you're in Russia in the Soviet Union, you love to read. You talked about the Three Musketeers and the Dumas adventures. When you landed in the U.S., you didn't speak English, obviously, to begin with. What was the process of learning a new language, and did your love of reading continue? And how did you feed that while learning a new language?
Well, so that's a very good question, Hank, because when you're a child, and if reading is your life, and then you come to a new country and you have to learn the language, and you say, okay, well, I'm going to try to read in this new language that I'm now going to be learning. And you open up a book and you realize that to say that it's not a joy or a delight would be to understate what it was, because it was torture. Because it wasn't reading, it was work. You didn't understand any of the words. You didn't understand the meaning. You didn't understand the connotations of anything. You didn't know what any of the words meant. It was so difficult. So I did what any child does when faced with very difficult circumstances. I simply did not read in English. I knew that it was hard, so I completely turned away from it. I said, I'm not going to do that. And they kept saying, oh, you're gonna read, you're gonna learn, and I'm like, okay. I didn't quite believe them. I continued reading in Russian and did not read in English, I suppose, for 2 years. The first book that I read in English that was a joy for me and a delight, and that I loved as much as I liked reading in Russian, was Charlotte's Web. And that was when I was 12 years old. And when I read that book, I knew that reading in English would be possible for me, and it would also bring delights with it.
One of the challenges when you begin reading in another language, I would think, is that not only are you having to translate each word and find the meaning of those words, but then in the context of a sentence or paragraph, you're also looking for the context of that, and which is probably communicated very differently in different languages, isn't it? Yeah,
and very, very difficult. And Russian is so expressive. Russian has many fewer words than English does. English maybe has 100,000. Russian only has 30,000 words. But they are very expressive words. And in any case, those are the only words that I knew. The English words, not only did I not have the definitions of the words, but I also didn't understand the nuances of the words. So it really was very difficult. The idiomatic expressions are the most difficult for like a foreigner to learn.
Yeah, and English is a crazy language.
I don't even know how to be the universal language, because it's so difficult, and all the rules are there to be broken.
Exactly.
And you can explain why, and why this is like this or not like that. I don't even know. But.
Yeah. Well, native English speakers don't understand it either. Yeah. So.
I learned that the hard way. I say that, at least I know my husband, I always say this to him. It's like, you only know one language and you still can't explain this to me.
Exactly. So Paullina, so what did you're in America, you're becoming acclimated, your family's building a whole new life. What did you see yourself doing, when you were grown and when you finished school and kind of got out on your own? What path did you pursue?
So my dream was to work for the CIA. That's what I wanted to do.
Nice.
My father's dream for me was to, he wanted me to become either a lawyer, because he thought that I liked to argue and that I would enjoy being a lawyer, or a translator so that I could travel all over the world and be like an international translator. So I would have an exciting life, an interesting life. And in the end, those
both
things didn't
noble
work out.
pursuits.
Yeah, the CIA didn't work out because unfortunately I was about to marry a British man, and the U.S. Foreign Service does not allow you to enter it if you are married to a non-American national. so that unfortunately ended that dream. And after college, I just happened to luck into a job as a financial journalist. So I actually wrote about the stock market and about about money and investments and all that kind of stuff. So I did that for 3 years right after college when I lived in England.
Wow. What, as someone who loved to read and saw herself as a storyteller, what did that sort of writing do for you and for your pursuit of the craft? Did you look at that as real writing? And I'm saying that with air quotes because, some people think, that if you're not working on the epic novel that you're going to put out, that's not real writing. That's the thing you do while you're working to do the other thing that you love. How did you view that job?
Well, actually, so I loved it as a job. It was a great job because it was, I learned so much about things that I didn't know. My background was in political science and Russian and whatever. It certainly was not in financial markets. So that was a whole new field for me. But I'm really glad the things that I learned then have, lasted me my whole life. So I was very pleased I'm very pleased certainly now in retrospect to have had that experience. You're right especially about that writing. It's a little bit dry. I will not deny it. It does not really allow you to be creative, which is something plus you need to write to a word limit, and you also need to write a deadline. So all these things for all these things that a novelist puts away and doesn't really think about when she's writing her novel. As a financial journalist, you're always having to be aware of, you've got to write 4 articles a day, and each one of them has to go out at 9 a.m. and 1 p.m. and 5 p.m. So it was a different kind of writing, but it was incredibly, incredibly instructive. I don't look down on it. It just wasn't something that I wanted to do, but it was incredible. And by the way, populated full of people who were also very, very good writers.
Oh, I'm sure. And I'm sure that you can look back on those times now and see all of the tools that you collected for your toolbox, so to speak, in that time that you worked.
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. Well, because also you like the way you have to write a story. You don't write it, once upon a time, the girl was born and then she did this and she did that. In journalism, you have to write the most important thing first. And that's actually a good way to look at some of the things that you write that have to be short. Like you have to write the most important thing first and then write other things. So it does train you. It does train you, to think a certain way.
Sure. So at what point did you decide that you're going to try your hand at fiction? Was there a moment where a story dropped into your head and I've got to write this, or was this, just sitting down to kind of scratch the itch that you'd had for a while? What was the thing that set it off for you?
Well, it was a little bit like that. It actually was during my time as a financial journalist, because I kept complaining to my husband about how I wanted to be a writer, and he finally got sick of my whining and said, "Listen, if you're so clever, so write something. Write a short story. Write something. Don't just sit there and say, I wish, I wish. Just do it and see if you can. And so I wrote this little short story, and I sent it out to like maybe 2 places. And of course, it got promptly rejected, by the 2 places that I sent it to. But the good thing that came of it is that one of those short stories that I wrote actually became my first book.
Really?
Yeah. So it became Tully, which was my first book, because the original short story was just a little slice of her life. But as I wrote that little short story, I realized that the character in it had a lot of life. And once I saw that she had a lot of life, it was like a little bush that grew into a bigger tree in my head. And then I said, oh, I think maybe I could write a book about this. And so I was probably 23 years old when I maybe 24 when I thought of her.
I'm going to come back to Tully in just a minute, but that exchange you had with your husband there, I think is a vital thing to highlight. Because, we hear the term aspiring writer kind of thrown around a lot. And I don't like that term, because I think either you write or you don't. I don't think there's any aspiring to it. Yeah. Writers write. Yeah. That's what they do. Now, whether you get published and all of that, that's a whole other thing, but that has no bearing on whether you're a writer or not.
Right.
So if you want to be a writer, you just sit down and write. That's what writers do.
Exactly. This is one of the things that I always see. People ask me about how do they get started, what do I do, what advice I have to give them, and I always say, people create these barriers in their heads about what they have to do first before they can be a writer. And I'm saying all you need literally is a little journal that you're happy with and a pen that you like. And you can write a little bit every day. You can write notes and quotes and little poems or doodles or thoughts about characters. Eventually something will form out of those pages. So I agree with you. You always have to, just see if you can write something and then see where it leads you.
Sure. So Tully, you wrote the short story that then eventually came into that. Kind of walk us through how that happened. What was the kernel of the idea for her, and how did you then spin that into a full-length novel?
Well, so the kernel of the idea is that this girl in my short story named Sally Tucker cannot choose between 2 men. And so we basically meet her in the short story at the crux of her life. She's engaged to one man, but yet she's having an affair with her teacher in the community college that she's going to. And she's having, some feelings about them both. And her name originally was Sally Tucker, and she was having this little, episode in her life about how to choose. She didn't know how to choose between the 2. And that was the kernel for me. However, Sally Tucker was not really a name that inspires a 700-page novel, but in a divine revelation to me, I just from Sally Tucker got Tully Macker. And once I heard the name Tully Macker, I was like, oh my goodness, Tully, that's the name of my character. And once I had the name, I knew that there was a book there. It just was something bigger than a short story. So it's very not discouraged about getting rejected for my short stories, because I never really wanted to be a short story writer. I always wanted to be a novelist. And so I was like, okay, well, this is just one more motivation for me to actually write the novel instead of trying to write other things before I write the novel.
You mentioned that this was like a 700-page novel. Which is quite a feat for a first-time novel. And were there ever any comparisons about you writing the next modern Russian epic?
Very much so. The man who bought the book for me, who worked at the time in St. Martin's Press, said that Tolley was actually a Russian novel, but disguised in an American setting. It was the great big Russian novel, but it was just happened to be set in Kansas.
I love it. So when did you write that book, and when was it published?
This was in England, the thing I was telling you about, the short story and the first husband. So then first husband and I parted ways. I came back to America with my 2-year-old child, got a job, but the job didn't work out. So I got some unemployment, some severance, and it was during that time that I wrote Tully. So instead of getting another job, like any responsible mother would do, I instead said, that's it. I said I was going to write. Now I'm going to write. And it took me 2 years. So it took me from the time I was 28 to the time I was 30, maybe, or maybe 27 to 29. Yeah.
So you finish this book, you sell it, it gets published. What does that do for your self-esteem as a writer?
Well, I was very pleased with myself. I won't deny it. I was very pleased that I was able to quit my day job, because it just so happened that I hadn't been working, like I said, because I was laid off, and then I wrote Tully, and then when I printed Tully, when I was printing it to send to possible publishers, I received a phone call that led me to actually get hired at Prudential Securities. So for 2 months before I actually sold Tully, I worked as a financial journalist for Prudential Securities on Wall Street. And when I got that job, Hank, I won't deny you, I actually thought it's not meant to be. I meant to have a job because I got hired. And then 2 months later, somebody, like I said, the editor of St. Martin's Press bought Tully, and then I quit my job, and I've never held another job since then.
Wow.
So I was very pleased. I was very, very pleased that I was able to do that.
Well, yeah, I would think so. What did you follow Tully up with?
After Tully, I wrote a murder mystery called Red Leaves.
What type of a departure for you as a writer was switching gears and writing a murder mystery?
Well, it was tremendous, and I think probably my publisher wanted me to write another book like Tully, but Tully was so emotionally draining. It was such a huge book. It took place over a period of 10 years, and I just didn't have. I just couldn't go back into another world like that. I just didn't have it. And a murder mystery allowed me, like a whodunit. There was a murder, there was a body, there was a detective, there was a police procedural. Those were things that I could really get behind. It was an interesting way for me to write another thing that was in a different genre and yet still keep some of my character sensibilities and my feeling for dialogue and all kinds of stuff like that. So I really liked the fact that it was a more contained story, that it was a different type of a story, that it required different things from me. I enjoyed that very much.
Did your publisher have any qualms about you switching gears and writing in a different genre?
So, not particularly, maybe a little bit, only because, like I said, they knew that whatever your sophomore effort was going to be, whatever your second book was going to be, was going to determine what people thought about you. Stephen King talks a lot about that, because he said that after he wrote Carrie, his next book, he knew that if he wrote another horror novel, that he was going to be branded as a horror writer. And he thought that he was okay with that, which is why he wrote Salem's Lot. But for me, I just wanted to be a writer, really. I didn't want to be a particular kind of writer. I just wanted to be a novelist. And a murder mystery really sort of excited me. After the murder mystery, Hank, I wrote a suspense thriller about a pregnant woman who gets kidnapped. So that was another departure. Yeah. So,
well, we talk a lot on the show about writers not pigeonholing themselves into one genre. And I have a lot of friends and former guests on the show that believe that you ought to find the thing you're good at, really hone in on it, and really write to that market. And I completely understand that thinking, and I understand that it works and why it works and all that. I get all that. But as writers, I know as a reader, I read all over the place, all sorts of genres, and so in my writing, a lot of different things want to come out because I like all different sorts of things.
And for you, this is what happens to you. So you write and you interview people and you interview a whole, all different people, right? And you get excited and fascinated and curious and interested in so many different stories. And that's what it's like for me as a writer. But imagine that a book takes so much of your life. It's 2 years, and it's not like one little article in a newspaper or an interview that say you work on for a month and then get it completely right. It's years of your life. So if you don't feel it, if you don't feel something behind the story that spurs you forward, you're not going to make it. The book is going to fail. And if I can't feel it in my heart, if I can't feel whatever it is I'm writing about in my heart, then those words are going to be they're not going to fly off the page. They're going to make you feel cold, and they're going to leave me cold. And if I'm cold, then you're going to be left cold. Who wants that?
You mentioned your sophomore effort and how important that was going to be for your career. I think there are a lot of parallels that we can draw between publishing and the music industry. And I think a lot of things that happen in music kind of eventually trickle down over to book publishing. And we've seen, there used to be this attitude that musicians would really be cultivated, and you could put out 2 or 3 albums as you grew as an artist, and before anyone really expected you to really become a bestseller or whatever. And I think that used to be true for writing as well, is that an author could put out a few books and really find their footing and grow into it. Do you think that is still the same today, or are people expected to come out, do gangbusters, or else?
I don't think so. I mean, are you asking whether or not people still want to write in the same genre? You mean if they want to just continue perfecting the one thing that they do well? Is that?
Well, yeah, and do you feel like that and I'm not talking about any one particular, but the industry is really interested in growing artists, or do you kind of have one shot and that's it?
Here's the thing. Both the music industry and the book industry, as we well know, are going through, some serious changes, and they've had a loss of profit, and they've had to figure out how they're going to sell things, market things, make things commercially successful, make money, run a business. We can't forget, it's all art and it's all well and good. We're not selling widgets in the publishing world and in the music industry. But we're selling art in some cases, and sometimes you forget that you're not selling just cups. You're selling something unique. And personally, I think that the publishers don't necessarily know what's going to sell. What they want is an effort made by their writers, and what they want is to have a book or a CD or a piece of music that's so successful that there's a word of mouth, and that people are going to go out and buy this book and talk about it and have it be a success. But if they knew the formula, you would have a lot more successes on your hand. Don't you think? If they knew what it is that artists can do in order to make their sophomore effort successful, then everybody would be successful, right? Everybody would then do the thing that they're supposed to do. Everybody would then be able to somehow fit into whatever it is, whatever mold that the publishers, the music or book publishers, would tell them that they needed to fit into. But it's almost impossible to predict what the buying public is going to love and what they're not going to love. Do you know, Hank, after my 3rd book, which is, like I said, it was a suspense thriller, my publisher at that time, he had read that book, and he said that he had no doubt that I now had a giant commercial career ahead of myself, because that book, my third book, was a great example of that classic best-selling pulp fiction novel that he thought that the readers would really get behind. And when he read my Bronze Horseman, my first Bronze Horseman book about Tatiana and Alexander during World War II, he was much less impressed. He much more liked my suspense thriller than he did my historical novel. However, in the fullness of time, there is no doubt that the Bronze Horseman historical novel has been much, much more successful with readers than my suspense thriller.
I agree with you. And I'm sorry, go ahead.
I just wanted to say, but he did not know that. He had no way of seeing that.
Right. And I fed you that kind of odd question because I wanted to get to the Bronze Horseman, and I'm so happy that you came around to that. Because the Bronze Horseman, this trilogy, I think before we started recording, you said it was like your trilogy in 7 books. Which is hilarious, and we'll talk about that in a minute. But this book, this trilogy, has really found an international audience, and it may be kind of an odd success story, and it's so refreshing to see that this book has had the legs that it has to really circle the globe and find its audience. Tell us a little bit about the Bronze Horseman and how this came to be.
Yeah, so I completely agree with you. It is remarkable that, nearly 2 decades after I first conceived of it, that it is still affecting readers, and I'm still getting feedback, and people still read it for the first time, that I'm still hearing about it from new readers, that I get new readers because of that book. So I'm very gratified, very pleased by that, because that book really came from my deep Russian heart, right? It came from my Russian heart, and yet it was imbued with all things American. So I really do think that I couldn't have written that book had I not come to the United States. It was both Russian and American in character. It had both sort of hope, the American hope and optimism, but it also had a lot of tragedy and Russian melancholy. There's no way. Both things really live side by side in that novel, in a very real way. That book started for me with an image that I got of my hero and heroine in the middle of Leningrad during a war. I just saw them together. He was very tall and she was small, and he had a rifle on his shoulder, and they were walking through a deserted St. Petersburg in the middle of the night, and they were both starving, and they were desperately in love. That's what I saw. I just saw him and her walking through the streets of Leningrad. And when I saw them, I thought that I could write a book about them. And that's how it started for me. So it started for me with Tatiana and Alexander.
And did you have any thoughts about coming off of writing a book that was very pulpy, as you said, and then going into this sweeping epic historical book, or just in the mind of Paullina Simons, you're like, well, this is the story that came to me, so this is the thing I'm going to write.
That, I guess this is how I felt about it, Hank. I felt that this is the story that came inside my heart, and so I have to write it. Believe me, I had many people ask me not to do it. I had my agent ask me not to do it, another publisher who wanted more of like an 11 hours type book asked me not to do it. And the publisher that I was actually with was not that happy with me. Anyway, we actually moved publishers for the Bronze Horseman. We went to HarperCollins in the U.S. So So they weren't that delighted with me. So I really had a lot of things going against me. People did not like historical novels in this country. They certainly didn't like stories that were set about Russia, because my story is set in Russia during World War II. And yet that's the story that I had. Those are the people that I needed to write about. So I really had no choice but to write it.
You've mentioned a couple of times in the time we've been talking phrases like it was the story that landed in my heart, or that you had a bit of a an epiphany, or there was a you give the impression to me like that writing sometimes is a little ethereal to you, like it comes from somewhere else, like there's something more going on outside ourselves. Do you look at it that way?
Absolutely, all the time. I completely, because sometimes I read my stuff now, my earlier stuff or my other books, and I cannot even imagine where some of those things came from, where that detail came from, where the scenes came from, where the color came from, where the words came from. Sometimes I just simply don't even understand myself sometimes where it comes. So I absolutely do feel like that there was something inside. You need to leave yourself open to have it be revealed to you. But I very much feel, especially because things like this happen where I'm in the middle of I had just given birth to my third child, and I'm in the middle of writing the suspense thriller, and suddenly these two people come to me in the middle of the night, like in a vision, literally in a vision, and how could you not think that this is sent to you, so kind of to focus you in a different direction, to focus you in this way, to say this is what's in your heart. See if you can write about that. So I very much believe that, and most of my books have been written like that, because I saw something in one way or another that I wanted to write about.
These books have been published in all over the world. What was it like for you to see that the story got picked up? The foreign rights were sold, and it started kind of finding its way into other readers' hands.
Okay, so here's my prayer. So when I finished writing The Bronze Horseman, my prayer at that time was, please God, if this book is published and bought by someone else other than my own publisher and is published, please let my readers feel half about this book what I feel about it. That was my prayer. And so the fact that I've had this sort of a response to it, my own response to the book was so visceral, was so life-changing, was so transforming, was so completely overwhelming that I only hoped that other people would get on that same train with me and feel about that book the way I felt about it. And so I'm very, very, very happy to see that in different languages, in different countries, that when the book connects to people, that it connects with them the same way that it connected with me.
Yeah. You mentioned, and I spoke about it a minute ago, that you jokingly said that this was your trilogy in one book. What do you mean by that?
Well, I'm only like I say, I'm only half joking, because originally it was just going to be one book, and then when my husband, my second husband, read it, he said, "Are you kidding me? You cannot leave it like this. You have to." So you could thank him for all the other books, because he just did not want to let those characters go. So originally it was just going to be the one book and its sequel. But then my publishers got this great idea that I should write the third book, a little bit about, something about the aftermath from the first two books. And suddenly that book became the longest book of them all, which is The Summer Garden. And after that, I wrote a cookbook, because I thought Tatiana was a great cook and she had all these recipes, and why don't we put them in a book? So I did that and wrote a book called Tatiana's Table, and that has like all her recipes and my recipes and little anecdotes and little stories. And then I thought it would be interesting for us to go back to Boston, Massachusetts, and to write a little bit about Alexander's parents and what they were like, where they came from, and how they came then to go to the Soviet Union and then give birth to Alexander. So, and that one little idea became 2 books on top of that. And so now we're up to 6 books already. And then there is another book, sort of, as I said to you, in the universe of the Bronze Horseman, though not exactly like a continuation, that I had just published a few years ago called Lone Star. So that's how we got to 7. And I still, Hank, and I still get letters every day from people who say, "Oh, could you just write about this person in the Bronze Horseman, or could you write about that person in Bronze Horseman? I really just want you to write more in that universe."
It's so when we find a book that we really love and we connect with, and those characters that we connect with, and then if the writer is really in tune, we find a setting that we really connect with. It's really difficult to leave sometimes. It's almost like there's a bit of separation anxiety when we finish the book. We want to keep going back to it because we want to keep living in that world. As a writer, when people tell you that, and when they say, "We want more from this," that has to just make your heart swell.
Well, yes and no, because yes, it does, because it means that the characters that I wrote about on the page, which are fictional, have become like real life people to my readers, which is incredible. So in that case, it does make my heart swell. But where it doesn't make my heart swell is if I've moved on and I'm writing new things, and every time that I write new things, people say, "Oh, this is good, but really I just want you to write like the Bronze Horseman or something else about the Bronze Horseman," then clearly it sort of gives me an existential dread kind of a feeling, because I'm thinking, well, how am I ever going to get away from them? How do I ever build something new? How do I start a new book, a new life that has nothing to do with them? And still you need to, but
yeah, and that's the conundrum of the writer. I'm glad you love it, but I'm already, these other people have come into my life now, and I've got to write about them.
Exactly. Well, I mean, think about a much more successful writer than I, J.K. Rowling, how she must feel, because she's a great writer, right? But she gave her life to the Harry Potter books. And yet after the Harry Potter books, she's still a young woman in the middle of her creative life, and she still has to continue writing. But all people talk about is Harry Potter. And she understands, because she herself loves Harry Potter. She understands how they feel, and yet you still have to live. You still have to write. You still have to think of new stories. You still have to publish new books. It's a quite a difficult thing.
And her detective series that she's writing under the pen name, Robert Galbraith, those are amazing books, and I don't think she gets enough credit for those.
And exactly, they are. And just the same way with me, I wrote a book. One of my books is like a modern Anna Karenina, set in New Jersey, and I'm very proud of that book. I love that book, but once again, when people read that book, I still get talk about the Bronze Horseman. They still somehow manage to always go back to Tatiana and Alexander. It's not a bad thing. It's just the reality of it is like that, because I still do have to go on writing other things.
Right. Paullina, we have a lot of writers that listen to the show. You have such a fascinating story. I've loved talking to you. But you have also faced a lot of challenges to get to the point where you are now. Do you have a piece of advice that you would like to leave the writers listening that might be struggling to get started, or maybe are feeling pigeonholed, or something that you could impart to them that might help their day?
Yeah, I just the most important thing that I think is a way to get yourself through your day when you're feeling discouraged. And because all of us do, I can't tell you how much of my day I spend, on the floor in my studio where I work, thinking, how am I going to get this done? How am I going to fix this? What am I going to do? It's too long. It's not enough of this. It's not enough of that. We all go through it. We all have these crises in our day because the day is long, the year is long. You can't always be like, wow, this stuff is great, especially because the first draft is not really always great, right? You have to work at it. You have to revise it and work at it. And my only thing that I can say is the only thing that helped me is that you just got to grit your teeth and just get through it and believe enough in your own story, in your own characters. Believe that your heart is true and that the story you want to tell has some good in it and has truth in it that will, that will be, that will affect other people, hopefully, and then just to keep going. My main thing is that I would say if there is any way that you could write a little tiny bit every day instead of like leaving it, even if it's no good, it still gets you into the mode of thinking about the book, of thinking about the characters. So even if you could write a page, half a page, a scene, half a scene, it's better than not writing anything. So even if you have to force yourself into a minimum of production, do it every day, because there's that sense of completion that you have, and that one little scene will become 5 scenes before you know it, and 5 scenes will become a chapter, and a chapter will become a book before you know it. I tell all my readers, whenever they ask me this, I say, look, don't set big goals for yourself. Just write 1 page every day. That's all you have to do. Don't say I'm going to write 2,000 words like Stephen King or 1,000 words. Don't do that to yourself. Write a page, at minimum a page. If you want to write more, you do, but write a page, and at the end of 1 year, you'll have a 365-page book.
Absolutely. Paullina, I've had a great time talking with you. I'm going to follow along with you because I can't wait to see what you come up with next. If I've learned anything from you, it's that you're constantly recreating yourself, and I love that about you. Where can people follow along with you if they've been intrigued by your story and want to find out more about you?
Okay, so there's a PaullinaSimons.com. There is also my Twitter page, which is Paullina Simons, at Paullina Simons. And I also have a Facebook Paullina Simons author page. So that is all my active followers are on there. So they can follow me all these ways: Facebook, Twitter, and my website.
And Paullina is spelled with 2 L's.
Paullina is spelled with 2 L's. Paullina and Simons with 1 M.
Thank you so much for taking time to come on the show, Paullina.
Thank you so much for talking to me. Thank you very, very much for that. I really enjoyed myself. Thank you so much.
Thanks for listening to the Author Stories podcast. For more great author interviews like this one, go to hankgarner.com and dig through the archives. There's something there I know you'll love. Tune in for new episodes every Tuesday and Friday. Now stay tuned for a special audio clip from Richard Gleaves' The Jason Crane series.
Mather steepled his hands. You asked to join us once? Hedwig leaned forward, eagerly. The appointed. Does that appeal? Yes. Do you even know what we do? My grandmother used to say that you control the world. That's not far off. But why? To what end? I don't know. Power? Pour me a bourbon. Mather reached into his briefcase and produced a file folder. I want to tell you one story. Have you ever heard of Centralia, Pennsylvania? No. He produced a photo for Hedwig's inspection. Spring of 1962. A pretty little town, wasn't it? Whitewash and ticky-tacky, pastel housewives and perfect lawns. A mining community, mostly. Coal. He turned over a second photo. A lovely young woman. There was a single witch in Centralia named Anna Lively. Anna had a green thumb. She could make her garden grow. whisper to a flower and send it shooting from the ground like that. Just lovely. But she was discovered. That spring, a boy named Bobby Avery received a Bell & Howell Zoomatic movie camera for his 11th birthday. Bobby amused himself by filming his neighbors, sometimes without their knowledge, through windows and over garden fences. 12 seconds of film. Just a girl and her garden patch and one swiftly blooming rose. It killed the town. Bobby showed it to his friends. Children believe readily. Bobby was the first to die. Parents looked into it, watched the film themselves, and they began to die. Anna disappeared. Perhaps they attacked her. Perhaps she escaped. But even in her absence, knowledge of a true witch was running wild through the population, as if Anna had beckoned it herself to grow verdant and spread. The great curse had killed 64 Centralians by the 1st of June. The footage was offered to a national news organization. That was the precipice. It might have been shown in prime time, between Leave It to Beaver and My 3 Sons. We came very close to another worldwide calamity, but we were fortunate. One of our own was in place at the network. He alerted his superiors, and they ended the situation. Do you know how? I'm afraid to ask. Mather laid down another photo. This is Centralia today. It was an aerial view of a forest. Endless trees and underbrush cut through by lanes of pavement. Just a maze of cracking asphalt, like the foundations of Sodom, ripped bare by the wrath of God. Only a cemetery remained, on a hill overlooking the former town. A white marble angel stood among the graves, grieving for the ruins below, like Lot's wife, turned to salt. You destroyed the whole town? Not I. This was well before my time, but yes. Just as you'd cauterize a wound to stop a patient from bleeding to death. We blamed it on an uncontrollable mine fire, deep below the earth. We actually set the coal burning, in case someone investigated. It burns today. Touch any of those streets and you'll find them hot, the asphalt melting as if the town sat just above perdition. It's not something we're proud of, but it was necessary to save the world. Centralia, Pennsylvania, and everyone who'd seen that film had to be sacrificed. Mather collected the photos. So, that is why the appointed exist, and that is what we do. Still want to join?